How's everyone doing today? It's your boy JJ Domination, and today I'm here with an interesting video. So, yesterday we talked about the AJ Bouye to Denver trade, and we talked about the Jaguars and like how it was only 3 years ago, this team was playing in an AFC title game. Well, I decided to kind of make a video about the Jaguars and do what I am going to call this little mini series a case study. So this is going to be called Case Study. So what happened to the 2017-2018 Jacksonville Jaguars? So what we're going to do basically for this video is just, hit on some points, hit on some things that happened in 2017, how the Jaguars were so successful and made it to an AFC championship game, and then kind of talk about what's happened since then and talk about where they are now. So for example, for this video we're going to be covering 2017, 2018, 2019, and kind of talk about where they are now. If we were to do if we were to do a team in like 2010, I'd probably cover like 2010, 2011, 2012, and then kind of fast track to see where that team is now, because let's face it, if we had to cover 10, 11 years, we'd be here forever. We would literally be here forever. Don't freak out either about the off-season previews. Those are definitely coming back. Like, they didn't go anywhere. I have the Patriots one already recorded, working on the Saints one. I have a mock draft coming out. But, I just decided to fast track, since I talked about the AJ Bouye trade yesterday, I decided, let's do a little case study on this Jacksonville Jaguar team. The 2017 Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to be covering a lot of different things about it in terms of record, where they stacked up, as a team in terms of different rankings statistically. I didn't really go too deep with the statistics, so if you want to know like total interceptions or total sacks or total third down conversions, like you can do your own research, okay? Like, I just covered the basics. We'll look into the quarterback situation because of course Blake Bortles was the quarterback, and we'll kind of talk about where they are now. So let's just go ahead and get into it. I think that's the best way to describe, or the best way to just approach it. So in 2017, if you guys didn't know, the Jacksonville Jaguars went 10-6. They were first place in the AFC South, and they ended up playing in the AFC Championship game against the New England Patriots, who were 13-3. One of the teams that Jacksonville had to beat in the postseason was the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were 13-3. So there's just a little nugget of information in case you didn't know. And now let's talk about where Jacksonville stacked up against the teams in the league. So if you're looking at the scoring offense for this team, they were top 5. They were 5th place as a scoring offense, which meant they were getting in the end zone more often than not compared to all the other teams in the league. And then the scoring defense, this is what Jacksonville was more known for at the time. Their scoring defense, getting takeaways, all that stuff. Their scoring defense was ranked 2nd in the NFL, I think behind the Pittsburgh Steelers. I could be wrong, but I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the Pittsburgh Steelers. I can't exactly remember who it was. And then you look at the passing offense. It's a yard stat. Make of it as you will. I'm not really a huge fan of like how many yards you have. I'm all about that scoreboard. But the Jaguars ranked 17th in passing offense in terms of yards. And then in terms of the run game, with like Leonard Fournette, Chris Ivory was actually here at this time. They were the number 1 ranked offense in football. Fournette had a crazy season. Chris Ivory chipped in. Blake Bortles did a little bit in the run game. This was the number 1 rushing attack in football, which is just insane to think about, Jacksonville actually being that good in rushing offense in terms of yards. Now looking at the pass defense in terms of yards, they were the number 1 ranked pass defense and the 21st ranked rushing defense in terms of yards allowed. So yeah, teams did run on them, a little bit in terms of the matchup, but they were a true lockdown secondary with Jalen Ramsey, AJ Bouye. They were a dynamic duo back there. I think around 2017, I think that's when AJ Bouye signed his 4-year contract, so you were creating something there in Jacksonville. Looking at Blake Bortles in particular, though, he threw 60.2 completion percentage, which is, today's NFL It's kind of below average, but at the time it was decent. 21 touchdowns, 13 interceptions in the regular season. But check this out. We get to the postseason, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Blake Bortles was pretty good in the postseason. I think his completion percentage dropped a little bit. I think it dropped to like 58%. But hey, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers. You're not being a liability completely. You know, you didn't turn the football over. They can't really blame you for it, right? So in 2017, that's when it went down. You know, they beat the they beat the Buffalo Bills. It was like 10-3. That's when Tyrod was sent to the bench on like the final drive. They put in Peterman, and I think Jalen Ramsey got a game-sealing interception. And then they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers 45-42. And what's funny about that is Calais Campbell jokingly predicted the score of that game and that they would win. And then finally they go on to face the New England Patriots. You know, probably a couple of missed calls away from winning that game, but ultimately they did fall short to the AFC champions, the New England Patriots, who went on to lose the Super Bowl to the Philadelphia Eagles. But yeah, Jacksonville, a very crazy, almost felt at the time like a Cinderella run that could be legitimized. And as you would find out by the title of this video, that did not happen. So I want you to keep in mind, first in the AFC South, 10-6. Okay, so where we go from this video, it's where it gets really dark. So the 2018 offseason comes, you know, just after an amazing playoff run that a lot of people didn't think this team would be capable of. This is how the offseason shaped out. So if you look at extensions, not only did Doug Marrone, the head coach, get a 2-year extension, but Blake Bortles got a 3-year extension. 3 years, $54 million, and then Doug Marrone, I don't know the money amount, couldn't find it. You know, based on like the little research I was doing. I'll be honest, I did put in some work for the research, but I didn't bother to look into how much the coach was making. But, you know, he did get a 2-year extension, and I think recently he got an extension for like 1 year. But, you know, let's keep it pushing. And then you look at free agency. They were a little busy in free agency. They made one big splash move and then looked to re-sign a couple of their own guys. Or one of their own guys, I should say. So they went after guard Andrew Norwell, who at this time was a pretty damn good guard for the Carolina Panthers, looked at as one of the more underrated, you know, all-pro caliber guards. He ended up signing a 5-year, $66.5 million deal, which, as you would imagine, is still going on today. I think there's like 2 or 3 more years on that deal. And then they also brought in cornerback DJ Hayden, who is on who signed for a 3-year, $19.5 million contract. To be honest, or 3 years, $19 million. To be honest, that deal isn't bad. He's in the final year of his contract. You could release him and get like $7 million or $6 million in cap space, but you know, he's a solid corner, good guy to have in the nickel. And then you look at free agency. Or no. They re-signed Marquise Lee for 4 years, $34 million. I think there's 2 years left on that deal. They could release Marquise Lee, save some money, but they'd still have to pay him for the next couple years. Some sort of chunk of change based on how the contract is structured. You guys know all that stuff. Now we get to free agency. Again, they released Allen Hurns and Mercedes Lewis. Now, Allen Hurns is currently on the Miami Dolphins. I think he recently got a 3-year extension, so good for him. And then Mercedes Lewis, he did play a couple of seasons in Green Bay. He's an impending free agent. I'm hoping they bring him back for one more season. If not, you know, I understand. I get it. You gotta move into the youth. I understand. But a good veteran, good blocker, good hands, just really ain't that good of an athlete, but really good in LaFleur's system when he does play. So yeah, those two are the 2 players they ended up releasing. Now we get to the draft. You know, all that free agency stuff's over. This is how you build a team through the draft. You can sign as many free agents as you want, but you have to ensure yourself for the future. So in the draft, they selected defensive lineman Taven Bryan. He hasn't exactly panned out. I think he's more of a 3-4 defensive end. I know he played in a 4-3 at Florida. I thought he'd be just fine in a 4-3. Not really. He's been okay. He just hasn't been like that dude on the defensive line. They also brought in safety Ronnie Harrison from the draft. Solid, more of a box safety. They try to use him as a free safety, and obviously you're not going to get the results. Wide receiver DJ Chark. slow start, recently turned it up in 2019. I had him on my fantasy team for a little bit, then I traded him to my friend Caden's fantasy team. He had a solid year. His first half was better than his second half, but overall, a solid year with, you'll find out, Gardner Minshew and not Nick Foles. And then finally, outside linebacker Leon Jacobs. Solid depth guy, a low-end starter, but a fine starter. Nothing wrong with him. So those are your notable draft picks right there. Another thing that also happened that offseason was they traded for running back Carlos Hyde. Kansas City was trying to shop the running back, and Jacksonville took a deal. I think during the beginning of the season, because I think Leonard Fournette was hurt, dealing with some hamstring issues. So they just decided to bring in a similar back in Carlos Hyde. Can't blame them. They got good production out of him. Now we go into the regular season all together, just big picture. And again, I want you to keep in mind, this team was 10-6, first place in their division. They went from 10-6 to 5-11, last place in the AFC. I mean, what a fall from grace the Jacksonville Jaguars took. But why did they fall so far off? I mean, yeah, it's 5 games, but how did they go from first to last place? How did they go from being in an AFC title game to picking in the top 10 of the draft? Well, let's do a little comparison of the offense. So the previous year, they were 5th in scoring offense. This time around, they were 31st. They just weren't putting points on the board. Leonard Fournette was hurt. He was coming off a big year. He was hurt. Carlos Hyde was a solid, shoe-in. But, Blake Bortles didn't really have that great of a year, as you'll find out towards the end. This team just couldn't score the football, and if you can't score, you can't win. Pretty simple. But if you look at the scoring defense, they go from being 2nd to 4th. So they took a slight step, but they still maintained their top 5 status. It's not like they completely fell off defensively. They were still really good. They were still the strength. And if you look at the yards, 17th last year in passing offense in terms of yards, and then the number 1 rushing offense. This time around in 2018, they were 19th in rushing offense and 19th in passing offense. So they were below average in both, slightly below average in both. But their defense, though, again, they didn't completely fall off the face of the earth. The previous season, they were number 1 in pass defense in terms of yards allowed. This time around, they were 2nd, so they weren't really that far off. And then their rush defense in terms of yards allowed was 19th. The previous year, they were 21st, so they took a slight step up in terms of defending the run. I'm pretty sure it was only by a couple of yards. That's really the difference between 10th and 21st is maybe 4 yards of rushing yards allowed, but still, that could be the difference between winning and losing. You guys know that. It's a game of inches. Now we look at what Blake Bortles did. 60.3% completion percentage. So he goes up a little bit by 0.1%, which is still something. But he only had 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. So his interceptions went down by 2, which is good, making less mistakes, but his touchdowns went down by 8, which is really discouraging. And it's not like he was hurt and missed 4 or 5 games. He played every game. They couldn't throw touchdowns. They could not get in the end zone. And Leonard Fournette, like we said, spent some of that year injured, dealing with a hamstring injury, and they just didn't perform straight up. Let's see. So now we're going to enter 2019, okay, this past season. Obviously, there are a few things that they signed Nick Foles, but we'll get there later. In terms of extensions, it's that time of year. You got to hand out some extensions to some of your key players. And one of them, not necessarily a key player, but kind of a bloomer for this team, was safety Gerard Wilson. He takes a 3-year, $7.25 million extension. Pretty good for a solid, backup safety, I guess you could say. But, as a starter, I mean, you could do much better than Gerard Wilson. Not that he's terrible, but it's you really feel comfortable starting him day one. They also extended their kicker, Josh Lambo, 4 years, $15.5 million. So, unlike a lot of these teams you see in the NFL, they don't have to worry about their kicking situation. They know who their kicker is going to be, which is a good thing, believe it or not, because teams like Chicago still have issues with kicking, even after that playoff game. And then finally they extended middle linebacker Miles Jack, 4 years, $57 million. That's pretty much the going rate for like top tier middle linebackers. I wouldn't say Miles Jack is a top tier middle linebacker. He's close. I mean, he's still a good athlete. Didn't have the greatest year last year. Kind of looked at as an underwhelming season, but I still have confidence that he'll be a solid player. He'll still be good. Maybe he'll reach top tier, maybe not. Now we get to free agency in terms of the players that were released. So here, I'll do it in order. Released and then signed. The previous year I did not do that, so let's do it in order. Released to signed. So they made a lot of cuts in this offseason. You might have remembered, you might have not. They were kind of in a bad cap situation. Didn't have a whole lot. They wanted to go get a quarterback. And I think they only had like 8 or 10 million. That's not going to go get you a decent quarterback. So they released right tackle Jeremy Parnell, who was in his early 30s. He's still currently a free agent. He hasn't really made a decision on whether or not he's going to retire. Maybe he will this season, but he's still out there. He's just chilling. And then you look at defensive tackle Malik Jackson. They ended up releasing him. He's currently on the Philadelphia Eagles. Solid player there. He might get cut again from the Eagles. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But, yeah, he's still chilling on the Eagles. Good for him. Let's see here. And then Carlos Hyde. They ended up releasing Carlos Hyde and Tashawn Gibson. Both of them are on the Houston Texans. Carlos Hyde just had a pretty solid year for the Houston Texans. Had a few big games, including 160 yards rushing against Jacksonville. So he had a couple of big games this year. Pretty solid. And then Tashawn Gibson, of course, a safety who was a key part of this 2017 defense, goes to the Houston Texans. Spent some time hurt, but he's still a solid player. And then the big one, quarterback Blake Bortles. Remember, the previous offseason, they gave the man an extension, and then they released him. They only gained like $5 million in cap, but they still are having to pay for Blake Bortles, but that's the risk you take. They extended their guy, and they figured out, well, he ain't really moving the needle, which is why they're going back into the quarterback waters in this particular offseason. So now we'll just go ahead and get to it. So in free agency, they re-signed Marcel Darius. They gave him a 2-year, $28 million deal, but in the second year, he had a $20 million club option, which this team did decline like a week ago. Good decision for them to decline it. I'm not paying a defensive tackle $20 million unless his name is Aaron Donald, and he plays like Aaron Donald. That's just my opinion. Let's see here. They gave a 3-year deal to their free agent guard AJ Cann. 3 years, $15 million. Of course, he has 2 years left on his deal. He's a decent guard. You could do worse, I suppose. So, maybe you hang on to him, maybe you cut him. And then here's the big one, obviously. Quarterback Nick Foles, 4 years, $88 million. Me and a lot of other, football fans who, have media outlets and all this stuff, like YouTube or just using their Twitter or Facebook or whatever, we weren't really big fans of this move. I wasn't really the biggest fan of this move. Not because Nick Foles sucks. Again, I'm going to say it like I did yesterday. It's not because he sucks. It's because, I've seen him outside of Philadelphia. He's not that good. I've seen him contemplate retirement, in Kansas City. I've seen him get beat out by Case Keenum with the Rams. And in Jacksonville, he just got beat out by a 6th-round rookie, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I guess we'll talk about that now. Notable draft selections. I thought this was I guess because they found Gardner Minshew, I guess you can consider it a decent draft. But outside of Josh Allen and Jawan Taylor, edge rusher Josh Allen, right tackle Jawan Taylor, outside of those two players, kind of a bunch of duds. Josh Oliver, I really wasn't a fan of that draft pick then, still not. And, they got Gardner Minshew in the 6th round, played for Mike Leach at Washington State. There's another Washington State quarterback slowly climbing up the ranks as well, Anthony Gordon. Don't be surprised if he goes in, the 4th round, ends up, filling in for an injured someone and ends up being good. That just seems to be how it works these days. But they drafted Gardner Minshew. But right before the season started, I think in July, Talvin Smith announced that he is stepping away from the game of football. So you're losing a linebacker going into the season, not to mention how you were just last year, 5-11. So now we get to the season. They did improve. They went from 5-11 to 6-10. Still last place in their division. But they did improve. So they got nowhere to go but up. Except you're going to see why I'm not so confident about that. And I should mention they did start this year 2-2. The previous year they started 3-1 and went 5-11, which is depressing. And then in the 10-6 year, they ended up going, starting 2-2, finishing 10-6. So good for them. Good for them indeed. But now let's look at some of these rankings. They were 26th in scoring offense. So they did improve a little bit from 31 to 26. 21st in scoring defense. That is where it gets concerning. They've been top 5 the previous 2 seasons. Now they're in the 20s. So their defense definitely took a step back, and you'll hear kind of why here in a little bit. They were 16th ranked in passing offense. So they did go up from 19th to 16th. That is something. They went from slightly below average to dead in the middle average. And then they are 17th in rushing offense. So they went from 19th to 17th. Again, a little bit of growth. Nothing really there, but a little bit of growth. A little room for improvement. And now we look at the defense. 28th ranked pass defense in yards. That is alarming. You look at the previous year, they were 2nd. You look at the year before that, they were 1st. They went from 1st to 2nd to 28th. They just fell off the face of the earth. In terms of passing defense, in terms of yards allowed. But if you look at... No. That's rushing defense. I'm so sorry. I read the wrong thing. I'm sorry. They were 16th ranked in pass defense in terms of yards allowed. And they were 28th in rush defense. They were one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. I'm sorry. I read the wrong thing. My bad. 16th ranked in pass defense in terms of yards allowed. 28th ranked rushing defense in terms of yards allowed. So if you compare, that's still bad. They went from 1st to 2nd to 16th. They went from elite to average in the span of 2 seasons, or 3 seasons. Their rush defense, it was always middle of the road. And now they're just kind of, bottom 5. So... yeah, they completely took a dip in the last 2 or 3 seasons. But now let's look at what Gardner Minshew did. Gardner Minshew, the 6th round pick as a rookie, with his mustache and his jorts and his jockstrap and his little bandana. Let's look at what he did on the season. So, better than Blake Bortles in terms of everything, really. Blake Bortles' best season was 21 passing touchdowns. In terms of this timeline, Blake Bortles did have a year where he had 35 passing touchdowns. Bet you didn't know that. But in terms of this timeline, Blake Bortles had 21 touchdowns. Gardner Minshew had 21 touchdowns. Gardner Minshew also had a better completion percentage than Blake Bortles in any of the seasons we've looked at. Gardner Minshew had a 60.6% completion percentage. Barely better, but still an upgrade. But Gardner Minshew only had 6 interceptions. Blake Bortles has had double digits in every season we've covered. And I'm pretty sure in every season of his career. And then Nick Foles. He only played 4 games. This is the big money quarterback. Only played 4 games because he did get hurt. He has a 65.8 completion percentage. That's good, efficient. But 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So you do the math on that over a, 8-game span, we'll say. You're talking 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Now you multiply both of those by 2, you're looking at 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. I don't know, math is hard. But you get the point. The quarterback play, yes, it's improved, but it ain't moving the needle. Now, this is where we get to what's happened recently. So, I think the week before the trade deadline, Jalen Ramsey was traded to the Los Angeles Rams, but they did get a 2020 first-round pick and a 2021 first-round pick. They're also going to get a 2021 fourth-round pick as well. And then yesterday, they traded cornerback A.J. Boye to the Denver Broncos for a 2020 fourth-round pick. And I kept saying over and over in that video yesterday, I don't know what the Jaguars are looking to do. I don't know what their identity is going to be. But I wanted to make this video really to just kind of highlight where Jacksonville was and where they are now. It is remarkable. They had that one season, 10-6. You know, pretty much an elite team. Blake Bortles, you know, you could have done much better. I remember me and Aaron actually sat at my house and we watched them play Pittsburgh. And I was telling Aaron, I was like, man, if they had a Kirk Cousins level quarterback, I don't think there's a question whether or not they're a Super Bowl team. You know, at the time, like I was saying that because I wasn't really the biggest fan of Blake Bortles. He did have a good playoffs against Pittsburgh and even against New England, but I just really wasn't a fan. I was just like, man, if they had, you know, a guy like Kirk Cousins, they'd be in the Super Bowl. Easy. You know, give Kirk Cousins this #1 rushing offense and watch him go to work, you know? That's just kind of how I viewed it. And, of course, you know, in 2018, we start to see them shell out these contracts, which 2020 hindsight, probably not the best idea. Then their draft wasn't really anything too special. Ronnie Harrison, you know, decent player, not really moving the needle. DJ Chark just finally had a good year. Taven Bryan, still kind of waiting on him. Leon Jacobs, pretty much a backup at this point. And then you look at this draft. I mean, yeah, they found a 6th-round quarterback in Gardner Minshew. He's fine. I think his trajectory is good backup quarterback, but this team kind of has to start him. They want to see what he looks like for a full year. That's fair. We've kind of seen him for almost a full year, though. We kind of know what we're getting, which is a, you know, decent quarterback, not going to move the needle too much. But, hey, maybe he just completely turns into a star next year. But for Jacksonville, this case study, they completely fell off. And I do plan on doing other teams, but this is not going to be like a weekly thing. This isn't going to be something I do every other day. This isn't going to be daily. We're going to do case studies basically periodically. Like, it's not going to be something you see all the time on this channel. You know, basically, we're still going to be doing off-season previews. We're going to cover what goes down in free agency. The mock draft 2.0 is coming pretty soon. And, like, we're going to focus more on that. Discussion videos, I do have one planned. But these little case studies, we're not going to do them that often. It's going to be like a special thing that I just feel like, hey, if it's the right time to talk about it, we'll talk about it. And if we go back and look at other teams in history, so like maybe 10 years ago, we're going to look at the short history of that, like the last 2 or 3 years, you know, in that time period. So like if we, again, cover a team in 2011, we're going to look at 2011, 2012, 2013, and then kind of fast track where they are now. Have things improved over that long period of time? Have they declined? New management, that kind of thing. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this case study. I hope it goes over well. I hope you guys do enjoy it. You know, it only took like 30 minutes of research, really, and it was just to make sure I had the facts straight. It really only took like 15 minutes to do all this research, but it's a lot of double checking, make sure you get the numbers right, that kind of thing, because it's really only like 2 or 3 tabs you got to pull up. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, man. And let me know, is there another team, you know, maybe within the last 3 years I should cover for case studies? You know, let me know down in the comment section below. And peace out.